Welcome to No Hacks. If you're new to the podcast, this is the place where experimenters and optimizers talk about experimentation and optimization, both at work and in real life situations. And if you're not new to the podcast, share this episode with a friend. They will love you for it. Today, we're talking about data, measurement, and taking action on that data and measurement with a guest who's more than qualified to talk about it. Bhavik Patel is the Director of Experimentation and Analytics at Lean Convert. He's also the founder of Crab Talks, a cross-discipline tech meetup in London. In the past, Bav has led analytics and experimentation teams at major tech companies like Hoppin, Gusto, Moo, and Photobox. Bav, welcome back to No Hacks. So good to have you.
Hi, Sunny. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
We talked right before Experimentation Elite in June. We met there. It was such a great event. Before we start discussing measurement and data and everything else, I just want to say Experimentation Elite, the next one is in December in London. If you go to experimentationelite.com, you can get your ticket. If you use the code NOHACKS10, you can get 10% off. So go there, register. It's a great event. I can guarantee you that. So Bav, we're talking about why it's important to measure everything in your life and at work and why you should not skip that part. When it comes to experimentation and analytics, and I'm not going to let you answer, you can't improve what you don't measure. Why is measurement so important?
I think this is it comes down to fundamentals. And you said it yourself, you can't improve what you don't measure, right? But I will correct you on one thing you said,
Please.
The importance of measuring everything, right? It's not important to measure everything. It's important to measure the right
Great
things.
Point.
So I just want that to be clear to anyone who's listening. It's like, because I think it's easy to go down the rabbit hole where you just say, hey, let's track and tag everything. When you measure everything, you measure nothing effectively. It's about finding the things that matter. Let's say you make some changes to your website. Say you're a product team and you want to make some changes to your website. At some point, it's become easy for product teams to just launch features and just launch new products without being held accountable for the impact of those things. You throw product functions and product leaders and like exec teams, they throw money into the product space, developing products. And I think this was fine during the pandemic and I hate the fact that we're still talking about the pandemic, but I think it became a pivotal moment where product management stopped being product management. In my opinion, it became feature management. So when you're making money,
can I just stop you? Can you explain the difference between, because there's people who probably don't fully understand product and feature management. Like how exactly are those not the same?
Product management is the idea of building and releasing products to your customer base, to your user base that add value to the user experience. And there is a value exchange. Customers give you money, or they give you some time, or they interact with your product, and in return, they get some things out of it. Not everything is going to have that value exchange. In some instances, you're going to build things that you've put money into, you've invested time into, that have not resonated with the customer. Whereas feature management, it's a case of doing all of that, but without a care in the world of that value exchange. And again, I think the reason I use a pandemic as an example is because during that time, there was this digital transformation. I think it was probably the first major digital transformation we've had in like 10 years. And I think the last one was probably like the launch of the iPhones and smartphones. But since the pandemic, everything went online. Companies that were typically maybe more traditional businesses had to go online as well. And people were bored. They were sitting around and suddenly they were just on their devices a lot more, which meant that for product companies, for e-commerce companies, it was like they struck gold. Anything they did resonated well. And there came a point where they weren't even measuring what they were doing, which kind of brings me back to the crux of my point, which is when you're not measuring what you're doing, you don't understand the impact of it, and you're just releasing, you move away from product management to feature management. Product management is about solving problems. Feature management is just, hey, let's put as much as we can out there.
That's a great really explanation.
For me, that's really what the differences are. So when you think about measuring, again, now going back to your original question, we came from this point in product management, marketing, any function really, where we were building things and we were launching, and there was never really any need to measure. And there was a skill set that I believe we were starting to lose. And I say we, like product functions are starting to lose, and that was the ability to measure. There were many other things that we started losing, prioritization, estimation, all of those types of things. But measurement became a casualty of the pandemic, because when whatever you throw against the wall sticks, or at least the perception of it sticking, why would you measure? So now we're entering this world where, and we've seen it across the board, we've had layoffs left and center, tech companies have pulled back budgets, vendors are finding it harder to renew contracts, even agencies, because people are pulling budgets. As a company if you're in a company which does experimentation, product management, being able to measure and justify what you're doing should be the core of certainly like your role. Yes, of course, you still do all of those other things, discovery and ideation and looking for innovative ways to improve customer experiences. But that has to all be underpinned by some type of measurement strategy. Because if you're not measuring anything, then how do you know what you're doing is making a difference? And you see it now, actually, like leadership teams are starting to scrutinize more over what you're doing. So if you can't justify the things you've built, the value of the features you've added, and effectively show a return on the investment that's been made in your function, it's going to be a really difficult conversation when at the end of the year, when you're doing reviews, you're maybe even at risk of your job. Like, you can't demonstrate this value. So for me, measurement it's just, yes, of course, it's important skill set to have as a product manager, but it's also important to understand how what you've done has the impact that it's had on your users, because that's really the only way path. That's really, for me, the only path forward.
I'm not going to disagree with that.
I'd be surprised if anyone disagreed with that.
That's my point. But let's say you are in the position where you're dealing with data and analytics within a company. And it's a difficult question to answer, but how do you know you're measuring the wrong things? If you're doing it wrong, like the assumption is you're not doing it on purpose. How do you figure out that what you're doing is actually, you're going in the wrong direction?
So I think this is a skills, and this comes down to some of that skills gap I was talking about. Because product teams have, even pre-pandemic, if I'm being completely honest, product teams have never really had their feet held against the fire, right? They really haven't had to justify return on sort of like the investment that has gone into product development. Certainly as much as marketing. Marketing gets a bad rep, but they are also scrutinized a lot more in terms of what they do. They have to constantly show ROI. They have to constantly work towards CPAs. They have to be constantly be showing that they're delivering growth.
Why do you think that is the case with marketing versus product?
To quantify, you spend 100,000 on your marketing.
Right.
How much do you get back? Or what was your cost per acquisition? And that's determined by all those customers we acquired. What is the lifetime value of those customers? And then you work backwards and calculate some type of CPA. And that becomes easier, but it's also still incomplete because you're forgetting about the costs of the marketing team, right? Now with product, it's just the investment on the team. Let's say you have one product pod. In that pod, you have one designer, one product manager, one analyst, and 3 engineers, right? And that pod costs you, let's say, I don't know, 100 grand a month. You wrap that up into 12 months, and then you try to, at least you understand the cost of that, but they don't have any other expenditure like a marketing team does. So you're really just justifying the cost of the team. Now in marketing, okay, they've had their feet held up against the fire, and when you look at things like ROI and CPA, it's always against the marketing spend and not the overall cost of the marketing function. So it's a little bit of an incomplete puzzle, but it's part of the way there.
It is, basically.
Yeah, exactly. But it's always been there. So the reason why it's easier to do for marketing is purely because of the fact that we spend £1 and we got £2 back or £3 back or whatever it is. That ROI is easy to calculate.
And that doesn't include the salaries of the marketing team, like you said.
No, exactly. But let's put that one to aside for a bit. But for product, it's not easy to do that direct conversion. And I don't think product teams are well equipped to be able to answer that question. And this is where experimentation starts to really show value. I know so many product teams who are against running experiments, or they just don't have the time, and all sorts of excuses start to come up.
I will not ask you to name names, but man, I want to know.
This is, we can talk about this. I don't think it's a particular name type situation anyway. I think this is very much an organizational problem.
That's what I mean. Organizations. Yep.
So even I work for a CRO consultancy, and we have buy-in for people who want to do CRO, but even in some clients, there is an extended team who don't buy into the concept, which is always a little bit of an uphill battle. It's great when you see that light bulb moment happen, but there is always someone or some people who will disagree with running experiment because it's costly or it takes too long, or they believe that whatever they're doing is the right thing to do anyway, which might be the case, but how do you know? So I think this is where that challenge comes from. And if you consider product leadership teams, they come from worlds where they have never really done experimentation themselves. So it becomes harder for them to enforce it on their teams. And I think we're now entering a phase where more people are aware of the concept, but it's still, in many cases, as far as I see, experimentation is still a nice to have. Measurement is a nice to have. Trying to understand the value of your product development is still seen as somewhat semi-optional. And I don't think it should be. Now, your question was, how do you know if you're measuring the wrong thing? And this becomes a skills gap, because you have to connect product to revenue or new customer growth or something along those lines. And again, this is why it's easy on marketing. You spend £100,000 and you've got £200,000 back, nice and easy. With product, you have teams who are chipping away building, and they're potentially looking at some metrics. Maybe they're looking at the right ones, maybe they're looking at the wrong ones, but they don't really, most people, I say most people, I could be completely wrong, but many people probably don't understand the unit economics of their company. And what I mean by economics, it's really like a fancy way of just saying, what is the metric tree that drives up from revenue? So if you think about the top of that tree, you have, it's probably going to be profit, but let's go down a layer. Maybe it's going to be revenue. In some cases, it could be new customers, like Netflix. I imagine there's a big aspect of them that's probably around like new customers or active users or something like that. Whatever it is, revenue orders or customers, whatever those things are. Let's say revenue, for example. Trying to go from revenue down to some product manager's role, which could be around improving the customer service side of things. Like, how do we minimize the number of contact centers, right?
Right.
It becomes a bit of a gap. Now, maybe that was a slightly easier one because contact centers have costs associated with them. You try to reduce those costs and it improves your profit line. But by taking that revenue model and then breaking it down into revenue is just simply AOV times orders. Orders is just new customers or customers times conversion rate. Customers are new customers plus existing customers. New customers are sign up registrations times blah, blah, blah. And you go further and further and further down. You keep breaking this down. And conversion rate is checkout started versus checkout completed. And then checkout started becomes product page visited and add to basket, and then add to basket to checkout. And you keep going further and further down until your entire business can be explained with some type of unit economic model. Now, obviously, the further down you go, it becomes a little bit fuzzier. But if you can show that actually this is how this thing I'm doing here goes up the ladder into revenue, it becomes easier to start justifying. But people have to buy into this as well, right? I think let's take a completely left-wing example. Let's take a look at PR. I remember this one time I was working at Photobox and we were sat in a boardroom with the CEO, the MD, and a bunch of people. And we had a kind of like monthly or quarterly review or whatever it was. And each team had gone through, product had done this, tech had done this, and marketing came along. And I was part of the marketing team at the time, acquisition, we went through X, Y, and Z. And then the PR team came along, and now the leadership team they're very bright people. And the PR team who were working on something came along and they were like, hey, we did this YouTube campaign with some influencers and we did this thing. We spent $100,000 on it and it got 5,000 views and 30 likes. And I'm sat there cringing, right? Because I'm like, okay, what do you do with this? And you could see this look on the CEO's face. And I was like, I remember this, like, it's a look you never forget, right? It's okay. I just spent $100,000 on this. And you're telling me we got 30 likes and 5,000 views on YouTube. If I was the PR team, I'd be like, holy shit, I would have thought twice about this campaign. But it's an example of you've spent money and you have no way to justify it. And no one really understands the value of those. For all I know, those likes could have been worth a ton, right? Those Facebook impressions, those
Correct.
YouTube impression and views could have been a lot, but I have no way of connecting that dot together. Looking at the CEO's face, this is a vanity metric, which in this particular instance it was. So I think with product teams, trying to understand when you're building products and features, are the metrics you're looking at, are they vanity metrics or are they real metrics? If they're real metrics, help people understand how they fit into the overall unit economic model. That's all I'll say on that, because I feel like I've talked a lot on it.
This is what we did at the workshop in Birmingham, Experimentation Elite workshop, remember? Yeah, I loved that. I loved the pizzas and all that stuff. It was very eye-opening. Great workshop, by the way. Bav was running the workshop. If you have a chance to listen to Bav talk or run a workshop, go and do it. I think that 2010s, 2020s, like one day this will be referred to as the early days of digital product management, or like whatever. Like, this is the Wild West. There are some organizations that know what they're doing, have a good idea of what they're doing. No one has it all figured out. But I think most organizations are just seeing what works, what doesn't work. And we're not there yet, especially because connecting that dot from, hey, I pushed the button here and then the order value changed in this way. There's so many steps in between. It's possible to measure it. I just don't think it happens very often. I don't think that proper measurement happens. Could be wrong. More about this than I do.
I don't think that I don't think that you're wrong. I think it's a case of what's encouraging is, whilst people might not be aware of how to go from A to B, like I've just described in this very long-winded explanation, but thank you. The motivation to understand it is becoming more and more prevalent. And I refer to some of my clients right now. Yesterday, I had a really interesting call with the CPO of one of our clients, and he was trying to build a data strategy, an analytics strategy. And this is not something I would expect a CPO to do. But the fact that he wanted to understand it and take ownership of it and build it, for me, was so encouraging, because we had a good hour and a half discussion that's leading to now a weekly discussion of me helping him build the data and analytics strategy in the interim to help, and whilst they bring on the head of data or whatever. But he's going to take ownership of it and try to drive it internally, which for a CPO is an incredible thing to do, because now he's going to have this view on data and he will filter it down to his product teams, who will then be in the situation where they've got it coming from the top down, and it will become part of the culture. So I think whilst people may not have the know-how or the tools in their repertoire to be able to do what I do, I think the appetite to do it is becoming more and more. And that's, for me, is really encouraging.
Oh, definitely. And I think as we get more young people getting into leadership roles, and I'm talking not 2025, I'm talking in the next 10, 20, 30 years, there will not be old folks running it the old way anymore. Like, it will all be the new way. And then this will be the norm and the default and the only way to do things, unless there's something new and something better. It's going to get better. It's getting better. And I think starting at the top, like with the CPO understanding and wanting to control it, to have ownership of this, like that's probably the best way to trickle it down to the entire product team and organization. So you work a lot with scaling experimentation programs, making them more mature. This is just what your job is. What are some data-related challenges that could prevent your experimentation program from reaching the full potential?
Where do I start? I think the core one, I'm going to just say the top one, is purely around the availability and accuracy, effectively the quality of the data that you have. So if you think about the fact that experimentation is not you may do server-side experimentation, but not everyone opts into it. And the way you measure the metrics are usually front-end metrics. Even if you have some back-end stuff, it's largely going to be your front-end metrics. And if you don't have good quality metrics going into an experiment, you're not going to be able to measure the right things in the right way. So the thing to really understand here is, one, what metrics do you need? And having that defined pre-experiment or pre-experimentation program, whatever you want to call it, is important, because you then know what it is you need to build. And two, you don't need to have all of them available right away. Like, I wouldn't not start experimenting until I have all my sort of like pieces in place. I would look at the first couple of experiments I want to run, understand what the core measurements are, get those put in place if they're not already. If they are, just make sure that they're relevant, they're accurate. They can be cut into as many pieces as you want. You can connect your experiment IDs to it. And you're good to go. So I think for me, that's the starting way. And again, I use an example, a very recent one for one of our clients. And they'd enabled click tracking on GA4, which I'd not seen before. And it was insane, because I was auditing their Google Analytics instance. And I was like seeing all these events come through. I didn't realize they'd enabled this initially. Like, I wasn't even clicking on a button, but it was
just any mouse click anywhere, basically.
Exactly. And it was
Okay.
all being tracked. And I was like, this is insane. But they were using that. And the amount of garbage effectively that was being collected in GA4 was like, you couldn't even do anything with this data because it's like, what the hell does any of this stuff mean? And like the product teams, I think they were trying to make heads and tails of it. So I said to them, like, guys, just remove this tracking. Like, first of all, turn off this click tracking. GA4 having click tracking is insane. If you use click tracking, just turn it off. And if there's one takeaway anyone has on this from this call is don't use the click tracking on GA4. Just turn it off.
They'll have more takeaways. Come on.
I'm sure, but if there's one thing, it's disable the click tracking and track with purpose. I think that's the key thing, right? Track with purpose. With this client, we turned it off and we identified like all of the core metrics that they needed to be measuring. From those metrics, we identified events. What are the events I need to trigger to be able to calculate those metrics? And then we identified what are the core metrics. We're not going to do everything. The first 2 or 3 months of this process was just about getting their P0 metrics in place. They were a combination of front-end metrics and back-end metrics, sub-side metrics. We've just launched them. And that has unlocked so much for them to be able to experiment on and get meaningful data without it being like, oh, is this accurate? Are these registrations correct? Are these orders correct? Rather, someone just clicking on checkout was firing all sorts of events. So now we have proper tracking in place and it's already unlocked so much for them. Actually, just a side note, switching off click tracking, that I said, it sped up their site speed by nearly 30%. So just know it's slowing down your site.
That's mind-blowing. That is, that's the main takeaway. I take it back. Like, disable click tracking. No matter what we say after this, it's not as important. Just disable, pause the episode, disable click tracking and come back.
Yeah, and the CEO was so happy. I'm so, like, this was insane. Like, I didn't even realize, I was just doing my job. The CEO messaged me 2 days later, Pav, we disabled it as you suggested. The tech team are like going nuts. They're really excited because site speed has gone up 30%. And he said to me, his words, we could have had our engineering team spend a year trying to improve site speed and we wouldn't have improved by 30%. And he sent me a bottle of 18-year-old Macallan.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was like, dude, you don't need to do this. Honestly, it's my job. He was so like thrilled. He's no, let me do it. I was like, all right, fine.
That is, to slow down your site by 30% because you're tracking something you should not be tracking in the first place and that you're not going to be doing anything with is the definition of insanity to me when it comes to tracking and analytics.
But I don't think it wasn't a case of I think they just thought, oh, this would be a good thing to allow us to get some data in.
But what data? Like, what are you going to do with the fact that someone tried to click somewhere where it's not clickable? By mistake.
Yeah, exactly. You have like heat mapping tools. Like Full is a good tool to be able to understand like where people are trying to click. You don't need GA also firing things like that. So it was eye opening for me because I didn't realize that it had that much of an impact.
It is. The real lesson here is just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. Like that's just a life lesson, not a tracking and analytics lessons. But yeah, that 30% is completely
what was really
insane.
sad is I was really gutted about this. I wish like they had even a couple of core conversion events set up in GA4 because I would have loved to have seen the impact on conversion.
Oh.
But we couldn't do that because they were using click tracking to try and track everything. We now have those core metrics in place, which is great. So I'm taking it as a moral victory. Even though I can't
you
prove
should. You got your Macallan. The real lesson here is when you're starting your measurement plan and your experimentation program, it's okay to start with just the core things. Make sure those are done correctly and only then expand and start. Don't spend months setting things up because that will be lunacy and you're losing a lot of time you probably don't have setting something up that maybe you will not even need. That's a good one. That's a really good one. And that's a good example of scaling experimentation program gone wrong. Like that's about as good as it gets. Let's talk about Crap Docs a little bit. I know it's a funny name, but what was your second favorite name for this event? Like you settled on Crap Docs, but there had to be something else.
So actually, Crap Docs wasn't the first name. That was the second name.
Okay, what was the first one?
So the first name was, if you've ever used meetup.com, I followed the trend. Meetup.com tends to have lots of events that are labeled Product Tank Meetup London.
Right.
Or Speakers Guild, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
And it's a very descriptive name. So I followed too. I called my conversion rate optimization analytics product London.
But you were not even aware of, you didn't even consider crap at that time.
No, not at all. So actually, the name came up after the first event. So the first event was called Conversion Rate Optimization Analytics Product Meetup London, something boring like that. And my friend, who is now the CTO of Huel, he spoke at the first event, and he was just like, "Bob, you should drop the O in conversion rate optimization and just call it crap." And I was like, "Oh, I like that."
Brilliant.
So I did. And Ollie, if you're listening, here's a shout out to you. Thanks for that moment of genius. Ollie does this really well. He comes up with like fascinating, like ways to brand yourself. Anyway, so
that's branding. Yep.
He came up with it and it stuck. And unfortunately now I can't ever change it because it's become too institutionalized.
Why would you want to change it? Like, why people know this brand? Why would you even?
Okay, I will tell you, because it's as fun as it is, sometimes it's hard. Okay, if you've been to the event, I don't really care for things like sponsorships and things like that, but it does help, right? Sponsors I don't call them sponsors, I call them partners. Like, we've had long-term partners, and that's great. But I once reached out to Google to sponsor this event, and a friend of mine was working at Google. I'd love to see if we can get Google to sponsor it. And their PR team or whoever just flat out said, "No, we can't sponsor an event called crap."
That's fair. Like,
so it's one of those ones where, and if you think about, again, the maturity of, when you think about something like Product Tank, or Mind the Product, or Measure Camp, all of these, they have cool names, but they're also very PC. And
what else they are? They're like ChatGPT names. Let's be honest. Before ChatGPT, but this is what ChatGPT would throw out at you. ChatGPT will not give you crap talks.
No, that I agree. It won't give you crap talks, but it does restrict it from becoming a very.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
Like, I could never really take this and make it like Measure Camp is my favorite event outside of crap talks, right? And Measure Camp, you have Measure Camp London, Berlin, USA, Canada. It's literally gone everywhere in the world, and it's a very different event. It's an unconference, but I could never take crap talks outside of London because crap is a very English word. Fair. Largely. It's largely a very English word, right? Yeah. So if I ever wanted to rebrand it and say I wanted to run an event, allow people to create their own versions of it, it becomes really hard because it's like, it doesn't describe what it is, right? Like Product Tank is in the name. Measure Camp, to some extent, is in the name. And so unless you know what the acronym stands for, it becomes a hard one. So I've shot myself in the foot here, which is why now I don't even consider a meetup. I just call it a cult.
A cult. So you're a cult. You're a cult. Wait, are you a cult leader?
I am a cult leader. We have a very.
Why are we talking about analytics?
We have a very strong fan base of people who've been coming to Crap Talks for a long time. Our retention, people, some of the guys compete for most attended events.
Oh wow! But you mentioned this cannot grow up as an event because of the name. Should it?
I think so.
If you have a following like that, if you have people coming and competing, who's going to be why would it grow up? Sure, I understand.
You're asking me existential questions here now, Zani. I don't.
To cult existential questions like that, it's that kind of podcast. Now, just kidding, just messing with you. But yeah, look, I like the name. There's so many events that are that obvious in what they are, and there's no element of humor or funny in the name.
That I agree.
I think it's nice to have something that has it. And once you hear crap talks, whatever your language is, if you understand, if you know what it's about and it's conversion rate analytics product, it's crap talks. I want to go see that.
Yeah.
There's an appeal.
There is, yeah. But and I definitely think if you've been to one or if you've heard about it, if you know what the acronym stands for, it's definitely the right meetup for the people in this space that we're talking about, product analytics and conversion.
Exactly.
And where it does differ itself is the fact that it's not siloed to one discipline. The event is so cross-functional, and I recently did a post on building bridges. If you think about teams as islands, like you have your product island, you have your data island, you have your finance island, your marketing island, and you have people who own those islands. I don't consider myself the owner of an island. I consider myself the owner of the bridge. I like to build the bridges that connect these functions together. And Crap Talks it's in many ways just a manifestation of that. I really wanted a cross-discipline meetup community where people can learn from each other and their skills and their roles, and there's always like a relationship in any organization. Why not bring those people together to learn about from each other? And if anyone's ever been, like, I track everything. I know we're going to talk about measurements in life in a moment, but I measure every single Crap Talks events with post-event survey, and our average rating is like 90+%. And I'm talking like, this is over. I only started collecting feedback like 5 years ago, but 5 years
only 5 years ago. Come on,
only 5 years ago. But since I started collecting it, I've had this stream of data I've been collecting for 5 years that is always like, how would you rate this event, blah, 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 typical NPS type survey. And it's always 90+% rating.
That is absolutely amazing. Look, I will be at one, and when you decide to expand, you know where I am.
You could run your own one, Sani. We're talking about it growing.
That's what I mean.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, when was the first one? This is my last question. When was the first event?
Oh my goodness, I don't know. It was January. I know that for a fact because in November I decided that I wanted to start my own meetup community. I'd just come from a really crap event. In the sense, bad event, not like my event.
I know what you mean.
And I was so frustrated, I decided to start my own event. And I went and looked at what are the best platforms, and Meetup jumped up.
Wow.
Created a Meetup page end of November. So I think like 29th of November I created it. And I looked at like what they recommend and how you set up an event. They're like, just pick a date in the future and then figure out the details. So I did. I created an event, I created the Meetup community, put my first event into like end of January, giving myself a 2-month buffer. Had nothing organized.
Did you have any people, speakers, nothing, right?
Nothing. I just did it.
I love that.
And then I went and solved the problem. I put my deadline in place and then I solved the problem. So then
that you created for yourself.
Yeah. And then I created for myself. And then I spoke to one of our vendors, Qubit, told them what I was doing. I was good friends with our account managers. We had a really good relationship. And they were like, Bab, why don't you come and hold it in our office in London? Oh, nice. Goodness, where is it? I forgot which area it was, but near Trafalgar Square. And they had a really nice kitchen area where they hold their all hands. And it was a nice, small, intimate space as well. It wasn't like some massive hall. And so I was like, great, check. They were like, you'll have to provide your own drinks. I was like, okay, cool. So I went to the pub. I went to Tesco on the night of and bought like a box of 30 beer or something like that and some soft drinks. Took that with me. I found a couple of speakers, Ollie being one of them. So I was like, Ollie, I'm looking for some speakers. He's like, I'll come talk. I was like, cool.
Amazing.
So we had 3 speakers that night. And then I think about 10 to 13 people showed up.
That's great for a first one.
Yeah. And we had a great discussion. Everyone thought we should do this again.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So next time, 20 people turned up.
Lesson number 2 from today. If you want to do something, just go and do it. Just start and figure it out. That's the way to live.
But I think there has to be like an innate motivation to do it. So Over the years, I've had many people ask me, but I want to start my own meetup, or like I want to do what you've done, build a crap talk. I spent time with them on calls, and I've talked them through how I would do it, and made some recommendations, and told them about some pitfalls. But ultimately, I just said, look, just build it, put it in the diary, and figure out the details afterwards. 99% of these calls I've had never manifested into an event because I think there was a lack of underlying motivation to do it.
This is why I have my podcast. Like, my motivation is to connect to the most amazing people in the field and just put a product out there that people will learn from, appreciate. In February, it's going to be 4 years since the first episode of this podcast. Like, never got paid, never had a sponsor. This is just me spending my time doing something I love, and that's my motivation. If you don't have that internal thing, that's not the thing to do. Like podcast, meetup, none of that stuff. Just find something else.
In your, like, for example, that's a great story, and you're absolutely right. You wanted to do something. There was some underlying motivation to do it. You're passionate about it, but you also recognize there's a lot of effort and consistency. And I think people, when they're thinking about starting something and it doesn't even just have to be like a meetup, right? Let's say starting a podcast or deciding you want to write content. People think it's a very easy, I'm going to do this all the time. So no, it's consistency. And it's a process that you just have to follow, you chip away at. There are months where I'm just like, I'm so tired, I don't have time to run an event. But I carve out that time, put it into the calendar, and solve it afterwards. I'm like, you know what, if I don't get into the calendar, it's never going to happen. So the writing is a big one. People, again, so many people said to me, hey, but I want to write more content, right? I want to have more of a web presence on LinkedIn. I'm like, great. You just need to do it, right? There isn't a magic formula to any of these things. It's about consistency, and it's more than like motivation will get you started, right? Consistency is what will keep you going.
Oh, for sure. But without the motivation, like you're not even going to get to that stage where you need consistency. If you have motivation to do it once to see what it feels like, maybe try a hobby or like whatever. But things like this, especially like you built a community around Crap Talks. Like it's a very live, it's a big community that people appreciate this event. They love it. So getting to that in how many, is it 10 years? Like more than 5 years, I know, since you've been measuring.
I think about 8 years.
8 years.
7 or 8 years, yeah.
Yeah, but that's what, when you talk to someone who wants to do something similar, like you need to tell them, yeah, you're going to have something cool in 2032. If their face changes when you tell them that, they don't want to do it. Like they just want the
really
result.
Good point. That's a really good point.
That's long-term consistency that will beat anything else.
Shall I tell you the one question I get asked more, and just think about it, the one question I get asked more than anything is, Bab, how do you find the time to do so much? I genuinely don't know, because with Crap Talks, with writing, with the podcast that I do, plus my work,
yep,
and I have 2 kids and like a family and stuff like that.
Of course,
I remind myself that what I do for a living is incredible. Like I love it, and if I didn't enjoy it, I would never. So I make the time to do it.
That's a wonderful way to look at it, because in anything that takes consistency, if you don't enjoy the process, like, or at least appreciate the process, forget about it. Like it's not happening. You need to appreciate the day to day and then hope that someday it leads to something big or whatever. But if you're not doing it just for the process, if you're not ready to do it just for the process without ever getting a result, find something else that you will appreciate the process for. That's my takeaway.
And just another fun story in terms of how long some of these things take. I've now been writing blog posts for, I want to say about 4 years, 3 or 4 years. There was a few years back where I decided I wanted to write more content. And I just published a blog post like a few weeks ago called Analyzing Tech Layoffs. This is the first blog post in 4 years that's gone viral.
That went, that was everywhere. Yep.
Yeah. And someone reached out and saying, oh, Bab, I want to write. This was straight after. And I said to them, look, it's taken me, like, if you're writing for the sake of writing, great. But if you're writing because you want to go viral, it took 4 years for even one of my posts to hit the highs that it did. And I'm talking like it was viewed like 30,000 times, read like 50, and 15,000 of it was like full reads of it as well. And that's only what I saw on Medium. I also published on Substack and my LinkedIn. So it was probably like shared and read nearly 40,000 times, I estimate.
But it was after 4 years of writing. And to go back to this podcast, the name No Hacks is that. It's literally that. There's no shortcut. You need to show up and do the work day after day, month, year, whatever. And then like in 2032, you might be like a big social media star or whatever.
If you had told this to me 8 years ago, I might have been like, oh, I don't know if I want to do it.
Really?
I don't know, right? It's because I never started off with a goal in mind.
Right.
I wanted to do something that I was passionate. I saw a massive gap that I wanted to fill. And my life is largely filled with things like I see something and I want to build something around it. Crap Talks is an example of that. I built Causal around a gap I saw in the lack of product analytics consultancy, and that did fairly good. And so I built Kino is another good. Kino is this fun little side project I built 4 years ago.
What's that?
It's a platform to connect speakers to organizers.
Oh.
So if you check it out, keynoat.com, excuse me, you can see that there's 300 speaker profiles of people in the tech industry. And I don't promote it, but it's there. I think I need to check it, make sure it's still working. But I really struggle to find speakers. And if you know anything about Crap Talks, I have this policy where I don't invite people to speak twice. So I'm always looking for fresh voices. And it's hard to do when people haven't identified themselves as speakers. Whereas Keynote is this thing. It's like, okay, let's go and build a platform. So
very, very cool. Again, how do you find the time? This is something that people have asked me as well. The answer is, if you want it, you'll find time. Sorry, there's no magic answer. This is it. If you want to do something, the time exists. Like it's your job to find it. I have a few rapid fire questions, and then we'll talk about experimentation and measurement in real life. I want 10 seconds per answer here.
Oh, God.
Oh, yeah. What is your analytics tool you cannot live without?
Google Sheets.
Wow, not what I expected to hear, but I love it. What is the funniest A/B test you've ever run?
pricing test. We reduced prices thinking it would be the right thing to do. We learned actually increasing prices was better. It wasn't funny. I learned
it's funny now.
It was counterintuitive.
It's funny now.
Yeah, it's funny now.
What's the most memorable Crap Talks moment?
That's not fair. There's too many.
I need one.
Okay, there is one. So there was this one time where the speaker was talking about a topic and someone asked a question about that topic and it was regarding the platform. In the audience were the people who built that platform. Oh. So we ended up in a situation where the speaker was talking about a platform, not realizing that the builders of that platform were in the audience. Someone asked a question about that platform, and we ended up in this three-way discussion between
the Spider-Man meme.
It is the Spider-Man meme,
okay.
But it wasn't it was so organic. It just happened. It just happened to be that the guys who built it were in the audience. Someone asked a question, and the speaker was talking about it. It was incredible. That was for me like a moment where I'm like, oh my God, this is the power of community.
That's amazing. I love that. Under 10 seconds, all of them. Very good. Most of my guests are not capable of answering a question in under 10 seconds. So you're good. You're good at this. Final segment for today. This is your mantra. This is what you want the main takeaway from this episode to be. How do you apply that to your life outside of work?
So back in January, I wrote a post. I was trying to... Okay, just some background. Since I had my second born, I put on a lot of weight. And in January this year, I was like, okay, I'm going to turn 40 this year. I want to try and do something about it. I thought about I started thinking about how what patterns are in my life. And I built a metric tree, if you will, around what drives my habits. And at the top, obviously, was weight. And I broke down, what is weight? Weight is just exercise and food. And then I realized, okay, food is me. And I basically, you can check it out. It's one of the pinned posts on my LinkedIn profile. And I built this metric tree. And I realized that actually I had this habit of eating a lot after 8 o'clock. Like in the evenings, just I'm an evening snack. But I also, I'm quite lazy. So when I brush my teeth, I don't want to eat. So I realized this thing. So I was like, if I brush my teeth at 8 o'clock, I won't have anything to eat after that.
Right.
So I did this for a month, right? Where I was like, okay, my goal was, my North Star metric was brush by 8. Literally, that was it. Brush by 8. And then I created this like kind of fasting model. So I was like, as long as I stop eating by 8 o'clock. Now, this was going really well. This is where trial and error comes in. This was going really well. For a month, I did this solidly. I think I missed just one day when we were at a birthday party, and I dropped a few pounds, it was going great. And then I had to go on a work trip for a week, and in that work trip, I tried really hard, but it was just impossible because we were meeting together, and like my colleagues were there, and I didn't want to be
right, of course.
And then when I got back, mentally and psychologically, I had broken that streak. And then I do a lot of coaching. And then for the next 3 months, I didn't do the brush by 8. So actually, if you go to my process, whilst it's still pinned there, I'd broken it. And it was because like now at this point, this was a psychological problem because I was like, I broke my streak and I was just demoralized. I was like, shit, I've undone all of this hard work. And I didn't realize that for me, streaks were, and I see this a lot. I'll do things. And if I do it consistently, it's okay. But the second the streak breaks, I have a problem. So I have a coach through work. She's like a qualified therapist as well, but so she was able to help me identify this pattern that I have, that I'm someone who's motivated by streaks, and I needed to break out of that. But I hadn't realized that. She was like, Bav, you've completely missed the fact that you spent 30 days doing this thing, and because you broke it, and that's when I realized for me, a conversion rate wasn't right. She was like, instead, Bav, move to a model where you're looking at something that's closer to weekly active users. So it's like, now visualize a jar, and in that jar, you put, every time you go to the gym or do something, you put a marble in. And so even if you stop, your jar is still getting filled up. So I was like, okay, this is true. I need to stop. Anyway, so I had this moment of realization, blah, blah, blah. And I also realized I actually really like eating after 8 o'clock, right? Like it's my downtime. I want to sit down, turn on the TV sometimes, just eat, right? So I was like, okay, how do I change this model? So then I needed to find a way to exercise more, because I mentioned like my weight is made up of how active I am versus what I eat. I also know fasting works really well for me, but trying to do it 7 days in a row is just impossible.
Right.
So I decided, I signed up to a boxing club, and I was like, I did a lot of martial arts when I was growing up. My kids do martial arts now, and I really like, so I was like, I wanted to find something that was a little bit like, but it wasn't about belts. It was just about, and so I discovered this group near where I live. Shout out to you, Phase Fitness, and this like really Rocky Balboa style warehouse unit. And you go in and it really smells of like gym sweat and things like that. But it's not like a fancy fitness class with all of it's literally scaffolding with punch bags around it. It's a father and son run gym. They're both, the dad's an ex-boxer, the son is an amateur boxer, and they're really nice guys. And he talked to me, and this was actually the power of Facebook advertising. I was getting retargeted a lot by this ad. And so I finally clicked through, and I was like, and I read through and I watched like some of his videos, and it's not even like, he actually has a 20,000 person followers on Instagram, and he does a podcast on YouTube. And I spoke to him. He called me. So I messaged him saying, hey, is this Phase Fitness? I'm like 39 years old. I'm like, I have high blood pressure, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, she's like, hey, Bav, let's have a call. We had a call. And he talked to me about he's Asian as well. I'm Asian. And a lot of Asians have like really bad lifestyles because of the type of food we eat growing up. There's a lot of like fats, and it's high in carbs and things like that. And he didn't talk to me about selling. He talked to me about the challenges I face as an Asian person. And then he talked to me about his group and how actually it's made up of quite a lot of middle-aged men. They have a WhatsApp group, and it's not just boxing. They support each other. They motivate each other in WhatsApp, and they come along. So he said, look, come along for a session. I went along. It was hard. I was very overweight. I still am to a certain extent. By the end, I was like gagging for air, and I think I went outside and I had to throw up a little bit. But I enjoyed it. And so then I went back, and then I went back, and I went back. And I've been now doing boxing twice a week for 4 months.
I love that.
And then I remember the fasting side of things. I was like, okay, I don't want to fast every day. And I can't now because I have boxing. So I have to make sure I have some carbs and food. So I was like, well, what if I just do 2 days a week fasting? So this is what I worked out with my coach, with my mental coach. She's like, just do it like a couple of days. And that way, if you miss it one day, you can do it another day. So in this way, your jars are still getting filled up. So sorry, I know I'm dragging on this.
But this is amazing. I love especially the jar concept. I'll add something, but I'll let you finish the story first.
But anyway, and so now I turned 40 at the end of this month, so I'm 3 weeks away. I had a goal to lose 10 kilos. I passed that goal just yesterday.
Congratulations. Congratulations. That's incredible.
But it was about consistency. So for me, I realized that I am a consistent person, but I also look at quick wins, and not quick wins. I also immediate gratitude.
Yeah.
Like I'm looking like I try to do things like that sometimes as well. And so when I broke my streak, I felt like I was starting from zero.
2 things I'll add. Number 1 is, I think it's called the Jerry Seinfeld rule. You can break a streak, but never skip 2 days in a row. That's his rule for writing jokes when he was a young comedian. If he skips 1 day, it's fine, but make sure it's not 2 days. I think it was Seinfeld. I'm almost sure. The second one, I don't know if you read the book Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. It's an amazing book. People will call it exercise and hustle porn, like glorifying suffering. It's not that. It's about the mental struggles and internal struggles. He has a whole section about the thing he calls cookie jar. Every time you do something that's going to help you move further in your life, work, whatever it is, just mentally put a cookie in that jar. And
this is
that's exactly the marble thing. Yes. So when you break a streak, it's not gone. It's there. And it's literally there for you for when you break a streak, to remind yourself that you're not that one day or one moment of weakness. You're all of that stuff that you built up over the years.
Yeah. And this was a huge realization for me, because I've done this in the past. If I break a streak, it's really hard for me to recover. But now I stopped looking at it as, but this is the problem, because I was looking at percentage of days which I fasted, and I brushed by 8. So the concept was right. My metric, my measurement model was correct, but I hadn't baked in room for failure.
Yep. But it all started with the metric tree. It all started with that analytical mind. And this is what we're talking about, how what you do at work in that mindset translates to life and helps you. And if you didn't start with the metric tree, again, what we did at the workshop in Birmingham, which was amazing and made me realize a lot of new things, you wouldn't be able to reach that. I'll ask you one final question. You do R programming. Actually, 2 questions. Why did you choose R over Python? Like that's my question. R is the most messed up syntax I've ever seen, and I've written a lot of languages. For me, it just never made sense. Not bad mounting R, but it's so complicated.
Did I fill this in somewhere? 'Cause I don't
Yes, you did.
remember.
Yes, you did.
Did I?
Yes, you
So I wouldn't say I do R programming. I would say I can hold my own.
Okay. Okay.
And the reason I did it is because it was the barrier to entry for R for me at the time felt lower than the barrier of entry to Python.
Okay. That makes
And
sense.
it was just, and I had a specific thing I wanted to do, and I found a way to do it in R. Most of the things I do, like the reason I'm good at SQL is not because I did some SQL courses, it's because I had a problem and then I found the solution. Just like Prep Talks. I had a problem.
But that's the way. If you're learning, if you're not going to be a senior engineer or something, then you need the basics and the structure. But if you want to learn about programming a little bit, like solving your own problems, just pick a problem to solve. But you need to have a problem first. I have one final question that I ask every guest at the end of the episode. But before I do that, I want to thank the audience. I want to remind you about Experimentation Elite. It's in December in London. You can use the code NOHACKS10 at experimentationelite.com to get your ticket. Thank you for listening. Please consider rating and reviewing, but share this with a friend. Share this with someone who will find it useful. There was a lot of great talk with Bav today. In my opinion, it was an amazing episode. Bav, last question for you. What is the one message or phrase you have for yourself 6 months from now?
Stay consistent.